Alright, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another retrospective video. And today we're going to be talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4, Turtles in Time. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time was released as a Teenage Mutant Ninja Mutant Hero Turtles, Turtles in Time in Europe. It's actually a beat-em-up arcade video game produced by Konami and released in 1991, a sequel to the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game. It is a scrolling beat-em-up game based mainly on the 1987 TMNT animated series. Originally an arcade game, Turtles in Time was ported to the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in 1992 under the title Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4, Turtles in Time, continuing the number from the earliest Turtle games released on the original Nintendo Entertainment System. That same year, a game that borrowed many elements, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist, was released for the Sega Genesis. In 2005, an arcade version of Turtles in Time was released on newer consoles. A slightly altered version of the arcade game was included as an unlockable bonus in the 2005 game Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3: The Mutant Nightmare. On August 5th of 2009, Ubisoft released a 3D remake of the game, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time Reshelled, available as a download for the Xbox 360 via Xbox Live Arcade. The downloadable PlayStation 3 version was later released via PlayStation Network in September 10th of 2009. When it comes to gameplay of Turtles in Time, like its predecessor, Turtles in Time was available in arcades in 2 and 4 player versions. In the 2-player versions, each player would choose which one of the 4 turtles they wish to control, whereas in the 4-player versions, the characters are assigned to control the panel from left to right in following order: Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael. Each playable character has his own strengths and weaknesses. New features include the ability to execute a power attack by hitting an enemy several times in a row, and the ability to slam foot soldiers into surrounding enemies. The game features a game control scheme of the previous arcade release. It uses a joystick for movement, an attack button, and a jump button. Certain joystick button combinations can make a turtle run, perform a side or dash attack, jump higher, perform a stationary or directed air attack, or perform a special attack. Players guide the turtles through a series of levels. The first takes place in the streets of New York City. Others transport the turtles to representations of various historical areas. In each level, players face enemies from both 1987 cartoon and the feature film Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2: The Secret of the Ooze, including the Foot Soldier and Stone Warriors. Bosses features Baxter Stockman, Metalhead, a group of pizza monsters, the Rat King, Thokon Razor, Shredder in a Massive Met suit, Cement Man, Slash, Bebop and Rocksteady, Leatherhead, Krang in his android suit, Krang in a huge UFO, Shredder, and Super Shredder. The plot of the game is the introductory cutscene of the game that details the game plot. It begins with the turtles watching a TV nearest on a Sunday evening, with April O'Neil reporting from Liberty Island. Krang flies in using a giant exosuit and steals the Statue of Liberty moments before the Shredder hijacked the airwaves to laugh at the turtles. The turtles jump into action in downtown New York in pursuit afoot to the streets and the city sewers, then to the Technodrome in the SNES version, where Shredder sends them through a time warp. The turtles must fight Shredder's army in both the past and the future in order to get home. They defeat Shredder and the Statue of Liberty returns to its place. When it came to the development of the original Ninja Turtles, music of the game's soundtrack was actually composed by Michihito Izumi, a TMNT veteran who also composed the music for the previous arcade games in the series. It was arranged for the Super Nintendo version by Kazuko Uehara and Harumi Yueko, both of whom went to produce several Konami games, including the following TMNT game, Tournament Fighters. During development for the game's working title was something like a TMNT Time Travelers, according to Konami USA's Steve Kaufman in early 1991. In addition to an original musical score, the attract mode of the arcade game is noted for featuring the song Pizza Power, which was taken from the TMNT live concert known as Coming Out of Their Shells tour. The game's music was released as part of a compilation of album of Konami All-Stars in 1993, Music Station of Dreams published by King Records in 1992. The 2005 version of the game included Mutant Nightmare features, the new music voices updated to match the 2003 TMNT series. This was also the case for Turtles in Time Reshelled. When it came to releases for the arcade, like the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game, Turtles in Time was released for the arcades as a dedicated 4-player cabinet as well as a 2-player conversion kit. Unlike the first game, Turtles in Time was not distributed for arcades into Japan. Now, when it came to the SNES, The SNES version was retitled Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4 Turtles in Time in North America and Australia, and Teenage Mutant Mutant Hero Turtles 4 Turtles in Time in Europe, in order to continuing the numbering from the past 3 Turtles for the SNES from the NES, despite the fact that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, the Manhattan Project, was never released in the PAL region. However, the Super Famicom version in Japan retained the original outnumbered title. Much like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game for the NES, a conversion of the first arcade game, the SNES version of Turtles in Time has some notable differences in presentation. While the SNES version is missing some of the animations and graphics effects from the arcade version, it made extensive use of the SNES's Mode 7 forward-scrolling effect in the Neon Knight Riders level, changing it to an over-the-shoulder perspective. Contrary to popular belief, Mode 7 is not used for throwing the enemy foot soldiers, as it cannot scale sprites, nor is any scaling actually shown. Sounds also differ from the arcade and SNES versions. The SNES version is missing certain voice samples for both the Turtles and boss characters. In addition, the arcade version's title theme song, Pizza Power, was replaced with an instrumental version of the cartoon theme song. Various alterations were made to the SNES version's gameplay. Sewer Surfin' and Neon Knight Riders were changed to bonus levels of a sort, and a new Technodrome stage was added, which features boss battle with Shredder sitting in a battle tank in the foreground, which requires a player to hit the tank with foot soldiers thrown at the screen. Several enemies were changed in the SNES version. 4 other bosses were added, which was the Rat King was added to the end of the Sewer Surfin' level, Slash replaced Cement Man in the prehistoric level, and on the pirate ship level, the duo of Bebop and Rocksteady replaced Tokan Razor, who were moved to the new Technodrome level. The game changes the final battle with Shredder to Super Shredder from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze. The SNES version adds 2 regular enemies, Roadkill Rodneys, which replaced boxing robots, and Mousers. The SNES version features a time trial mode and a 2-player versus fight mode. Like the arcade version, each turtle is given multiple unique abilities in areas such as speed and strength. In addition to move or throw enemies off screen can now be performed intentionally instead of just randomly, a technique specifically required at the end of the Technodrome level. Emulated re-releases. An emulated conversion of the original arcade game can be unlocked after completing the first batch of missions in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 Mutant Nightmare. This game is emulated from the 4-player version. Differences include a lack of score counter and the entirely new soundtrack, likely due to rights issues with the original soundtrack, altered voices, and a slightly choppy frame rate compared to the arcade. Much like the version it was based off of, the characters are assigned by controller. This means that Donatello and Raphael are not playable in the PlayStation 2 version without multi-app, as the base console only has 2 controller slots. The new soundtrack is a rearranged version from the Nintendo DS version of Mutant Nightmare. The arcade and SNES versions of the game were re-released as part of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles The Cowabunga Collection in 2022. When it comes to reception following its release, Turtles in Time became Konami's best-selling arcade title. In the United States, the home console conversion was a top-selling Super NES game in September of 1992. When it comes to reviews of the game, the arcade game received several positive reviews. Although critics found that the second game was largely similar to the previous arcade game, it felt like that there was a net improvement over its predecessor on all points, including graphics, music, and gameplay. Overall, the game was hailed for staying true to its source material. The SNES version was praised for its additional stages and gameplay modes. The 4 reviewers of Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it a unanimous scores of 9 out of 10 each, applauding the fun gameplay, the new moves, the accurate recreation of the arcade version's graphics, and the 2-player versus mode, though they criticized the game was too easy. The SNES game was lauded in Allegame for its visuals, which replicate the cartoon's art style. The game's music and sound effects have also been praised. However, the game was criticized by Armchair Empire for its repetitive gameplay and short length. Nintendo Joe called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4 Turtles in Time the best Ninja Turtles game of all time. Entertainment Weekly wrote that the Turtles may have packed on the big screen, but in video games, they're just reaching their potential. Game Zero's magazine's 4 reviewers gave the game a combined review score of 84.5 out of 100. They praised the graphics and the option to switch between the animation and comic book style graphics, and gave praise to the game's music, improved moveset, and voice acting. The only criticism that was given was being too easy when played on hard mode. Super Gamer gave an overall review score of 90%, calling the game highly impressive cartoon platforming beat 'em up. When it comes to accolades, Nintendo's Power ranked the game 7th in their top 10 in 1992, praising the characters being well animated, concluding the popularity of Konami's TMNT series with players, and the new theme of time travel put this onto our year-end top 10. IGN ranked the game 39th of their top 100 SNES games of all time, praising the bright graphics and captures the look of the personality of the classic cartoon, and praising the utilization of Mode 7 when throwing enemies onto the screen. Games Radar ranked the game as number 24 on their best SNES games of all time. They praised the game's music and commenting that Turtles in Time improved everything the original game did that made it better, and felt the game was one of the best action games on the SNES. In 2013, Arcade Sushi ranked Turtles in Time 10th on their 10th best retro beat-em-ups. They praised the game's aesthetic, staying true to the franchise's cartoon series. In 2018, Complex listed the game 9th in its best Super Nintendo games of all time. And in 2023, Time Extension included the SNES version of their top 25 best beat-em-ups of all time list. They called it the best game in the series. When it comes to a remake, the 2009 remake Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time Reshelled features new graphics and sounds. The graphics were remade in 3D with players moving in and out of a true 3D camera. The opening and closing cinematics were remade with a stylish 2D look. The vocal quips of the arcade version returned, re-recorded by the cast of the 2003 cartoon. The music was also redone. Reshelled is based on the original arcade machine rather than the SNES version. As a result, the extra stages and enemy characters from the earlier home version were excluded. The gameplay remains similar, except that players can attack in 8 directions. The game can also be played online via up to 4 players. This version also features a survival mode, quick play mode, multiple difficulties, and achievement and trophy support. So yeah, that is basically the retrospective of Turtles in Time from the article that I just read to you. But there's actually even more to this game when you're talking about a player's or a kid's personal experience with it. Because back then, there was not a game quite like Turtles in Time. My first experience with the game was I went to a friend's house for his birthday. It was his 8th birthday, I believe, and he ended up getting Turtles in Time as one of his birthday gifts. And we rushed into his room, we put it in the SNES, and we played the living hell out of it, and I loved it so much that I just had to have it as soon as possible. And it just looked really good, it sounded really good. You got to control the turtles, which every kid loved the turtles at the time, right? It was just an amazing experience. And the thing is, we never really got far in the game because, well, quite frankly, you couldn't stay at his house all day, you know? I mean, I think it was on a weekday when we were there, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I think we were there on a weekday. So it's not like we could stay up all night and play the video game for as long as we possibly can until we beat it or until we can't play it anymore. So, that was my first experience with Turtles in Time. And for me personally, I actually have to say that in my humble opinion, as being somebody who is currently 38 years old and was 7 years old when this game came out, I have to actually say that overall through the years with all the different Turtles games that I've played, this one has had the most impact. This one has been the best sounding one in terms of the music, the one that really just brings you back and just reminds you of such a great game. The SNES port was excellent, obviously. It was the game that really had that level of impact that was as good as it truly was. And let me tell you, to this day, I would say that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time is still the best Turtles game ever made. I know that recently we had Turtles in Time, what was it? Not Reshelled, excuse me. But we recently had a Turtles game that was re-released. That came out recently. Shredder's Revenge, that's right. And it really played an homage to these old school Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games, from like the original arcade game 1 and 2, and then part 3, the Manhattan Project, and then obviously part 4, which is Turtles in Time. There was a little bit of everything there were elements from all of those games that were brought into that game, obviously. But in terms of originality, well, I don't want to say originality because this game wasn't too original, because it did take a lot of elements from previous games and basically just upgraded them to the SNES version and stuff while adding a few elements here and there, which is pretty much what a sequel used to mean back then, and that's basically what they did back then. But with all that being said, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4 is my personal favorite Turtles game that has ever been made. I know that Shredder's Revenge, in terms of this style of Turtles game with the classic gameplay, the classic look, the nostalgia and everything, I know that Shredder's Revenge is probably is likely superior to this game when you think about it, sure. But that game came out last year in 2022. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, I'm going to exclude that, but when you're talking about the classic original OG Ninja Turtles games, this one was by far the best. And there were other games that came out that looked better and that had different gameplay elements to them and stuff like that, and really utilized the graphics engine for the next generation of consoles, for like, let's say, the Xbox or the GameCube or the PlayStation 2, to name a few consoles, sure. But in terms of the level of impact that the game had, Turtles in Time is A1 in my opinion. If you ask anybody around my age range what's the best Turtles game they've ever played, or which Turtles game they remember the most, Turtles in Time is likely to be that answer, right? And if the thing is, even if they don't remember, which they would, but let's just say they wouldn't remember which one it was because, I don't know, for whatever reason, they probably grew up out of gaming and stuff like that, which is, again, normal, and it happens to people. But like, if they were to listen to a music soundtrack, or if they were to see a stage or something like that, they'd be like, yep, that one right there. They would just point at it and be like, yep, that one. I specifically remember that one. And that one was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4, Turtles in Time. And when you look at this level here, which is the first level to where you're actually going back in time, to where Shredder basically puts you in a time warp, guess what? Like, when you look at the colors, when you look at the color palette, and when you look at the foot soldiers and the different colored foot soldiers that can do different things, little things like that were really praised back then. Really simple, but at the same time praised, because back then things were simple. Gaming and games in general, in terms of their ability and in terms of the way they looked and the way they played, it just wasn't the same as it is today, because back then we were a lot more limited, and the hardware was obviously a lot more limited. But you got to give praise to the developers, because with the limited technology and the limited hardware, they're literally like making gold with this type of technology, right? Or should I say the lack of technology, so to speak, right? To where it is the way it is for a specific reason. So, long story short, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time was one of the best Turtles games ever made. The port for the Super NES was one of the best ports ever made. That, in my opinion, stands tall, right? It stands tall even next to the arcade port because of, again, the differences yet similarities with the arcade version. And the music is absolutely one of the best the best soundtracks that you can listen to this day, from not just from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series and franchise, but we're talking about like gaming soundtracks in general. There's games out there like Donkey Kong Country for the Super NES that are absolutely legendary games in their own right, and one of the reasons why is because the game's official soundtrack was that good. It was that incredible. It was that memorable. It was even the ending soundtracks. Like when you listen to the soundtrack here, like obviously every game has its own theme and its own style, but when you listen to the soundtrack of this game and when you get to the end credits, right, it just hits differently. And it's the same thing with Donkey Kong Country. Go and listen to the end credits of Donkey Kong Country's end credits. Like, how can you not love that track? Go listen to Aquatic Ambience from Donkey Kong Country. How can you not love that track? It is, to this day, I still feel the same way inside in terms of nostalgia when I was a kid. It made you feel kind of like sad that the game was over, but the game made you feel a certain way, like, hey, this was epic. This was so epic that I might shed a tear because this game was that good. And when you, as an artist, you're looking at how do you start your presentation, right? And how do you continue on, right, throughout that presentation, like the main course, and then how do you finish that presentation, right? Because this is how an artist presents themselves. It's like you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it all has to be consistent, right? So you're thinking, okay, we're going to start this in an epic way, but we got to keep it epic throughout the entirety, and at the same time, we got to end it and make the player feel like they've been on a journey, right? And how do you get that? How do you get that? You simply get it by putting everything together. And how do you put it together? You put it together with by the music, you put it together by the gameplay, and by the looks. So it's literally art form put together in a story. And this particular story in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, is something that brings you back to that time, if you were around at that time, or if you were blessed enough to be having one of these games be one of the first games you've ever played. Because there are players in this day and age that do play these types of games as their first games, because their parents held on to that hardware, and they're gonna be like, you know what, my son or my daughter, I want to pass it on to them, and I want them to play it when they're really young, and then they can get the newer stuff, as they get older and stuff like that. But they had a start with these games, and similar to what my generation did. Something like that is actually kind of rare, I think, nowadays. But because it's okay in this day and age to be a gamer compared to what it used to be, I think that there's a handful of parents out there that kept the hardware and are keeping those games and that hardware for their kids to play when they're really, really young. And then when they get older, they obviously get introduced to, better hardware, or should I say more modern hardware. But they basically get their foundations in the same way that somebody my age got their foundations, which was this game. I didn't start gaming until I was 7 years old, and this was sometime before I turned 8 when this game came out, and when I played it for the first time at my friend's house on his 8th birthday. So this was one of the beginning games that really just made me fall in love with games in the first place. I was already in love with games in the first place, but when you're first introduced to games like this on a new system, which, Super Nintendo was newer than a regular Nintendo and all that, it's like, it just hit differently, man. And when you were a kid, you were like, wow, I had to have that. It's like, what do I have to do to have that? I'll give my parents straight A's. I'll give I'll get A's and B's in order to get this, right? So, and a lot of times it worked because obviously parents want you to get good grades, right? So what's one really good way to get what you want? You get good grades. You want this for Christmas? Okay, make sure your report card comes back good with A's and B's. So things like that, really. And you were motivated because you remembered what it was like to play that game for the first time. You remembered what it was like to get the turtles in your control, and how the sound was like, and what it was like, and being at your friend's house. And it's like, wow, imagine if I had this on a weekend, right? For myself, I can just play it all night, right? I've got the option to play it all night or to play it whenever I want to. I don't have to go to my friend's house. I don't have to, I can do this my way, right? So as a kid, you would think about all these things, and you're like, and this is what makes memories like this so great. This is what makes the retrospective commentary so great. And as in the footage here, you see Bebop and Rocksteady. Again, they literally, as explained in the retrospective, they really brought like the cartoon and the source material onto the console and onto the arcades, and they let the kids play with it. I mean, they gave it to us kids, and we were thankful for it, because we had only been getting the cartoons and the toys and then the old NES games. And with this game for the Super NES, it looked better, it sounded better, it played better, and it just gave us everything we could want from an NES game, for the Super NES game that revolved the Turtles. And it was done very well. Again, I praise the developers for the excellent soundtrack. I praise for the cleanliness of graphics. I mean, obviously you're seeing it now of how it used to look like, but when you look at it, it's clean, right? You're looking at it, it's like, hey, that's pretty damn clean. So I praise the developers for that. I praise the Konami, who were obviously in their prime when they made this game. It was, well, obviously it was still in the beginning, but they were still in their prime. And when you hear stories about what it takes to develop a game nowadays, and what it was back in the day and how it is now and stuff like that, these developers, especially the ones that are, I mean, they're truly artistic, and they're truly talented people, and they are literally taking a concept that is born from thought, that has some material behind it, depending on if it was something original or not, and they are tasked with the project with deadlines in terms of making this happen and literally tell a story and put players in control of that story. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, is a very good example of that. I mean, I know we've come a long way in terms of technological advancement since then, but with that being said, you cannot deny the impact that a game would have simply because of its origins, simply because of how it originally was conceived and how it was created and what it ended up becoming with all these different forms of media, of video games, cartoons, toys, movies, all that kind of stuff, that had such a big impact on the fan base, myself and obviously the kids, right? So and I'm really glad that I got to be a part of it. I'm really glad that I got to be a part of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles legacy. When I look back on my childhood, which were some of the most memorable moments of my life and some of the happiest moments of my life, I have to credit it to a game such as this, because some of the most memorable and happiest moments of my life was when I first played this game at my friend's 8th birthday party. It was when I finally got this game for myself on console. It was when I got to play it at my house with other friends on console, to where we would just play it until we beat it, if we could beat it together, and things like that. And then we would watch the movies and we would talk about it, and we would make comparisons with the movies in the video game and stuff like that. Sometimes we would even draw pictures. We would even be inspired to draw pictures and stuff like that. And this is what made, just an example. This is just a small example of what made the 90s era of video games so special. And as time went on, you started to see the difference between the consoles and how they were able to progress graphically, and the different games that would come out following the previous game. And it really made you appreciate that sort of thing as a kid, right? And of course, as you continue to get older, you start to see things differently. You're like, wow, this game looks great. And then you look at the old stuff, it's like, wow, this used to look like this, now it looks like this, and it plays like this now. So the games have evolved over time, obviously, and the Turtles games as well are no exception. But despite evolution and everything like that, Turtles in Time just did too many things right. You know, obviously, like every other game, there's some weaknesses. Like it's fairly short. Some people will say it's very easy. I personally had a little bit of a hard time, especially towards the end, but it is what it is. But a lot of people will say it was easy. A lot of people will say it was too short and stuff like that. But it was a sweet experience nonetheless, right? It was a sweet experience nonetheless. And at the end of the day, I'm happy that I got to play it regardless of a few of the shortcomings, because the positives really outweighed the negatives. And that was what made Turtles in Time so special for me. That is what made Turtles in Time so special for many other people that are of my era. And I just feel nothing but complete happiness and nostalgic whenever I do watch this game or play this game, or whenever I talk about this game as of right now. And I'm just glad I got to be a part of it, and I'm glad to have shared this with you. So with that being said, I think I'm gonna end it here. There's a couple of stages left in this gameplay here, but I've said what I wanted to say in this commentary, and I just feel really, I feel really fulfilled when it comes to talking about my overall thoughts with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Turtles in Time game. And I could go on a little bit more, but I think I'd get a little bit too repetitive, so I'm going to stop here. So with that being said, I want to pass it off to you guys before leaving, and that is, what kind of impact has Turtles in Time had on you? Because I know that there are a few OGs in here that are around my age range, some of you are even older, that played this game, or I've heard about this game or whatnot, that it had a sort of impact on you, right? So what does Turtles in Time mean to you? What kind of an impact did it have on you? Who is your favorite turtle? And what would you have liked to see in this game that you didn't get to see and were hoping was in this game? Let me know down in the comment section. I would love to hear it, to have a brief conversation with you guys as well. So with that being said, thank you very much for watching and or listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.